Okay, here we go. So, photography, for the most part, is a way in which the wider world is brought home to us. It can, as they say, have the power of 1,000 words, and it's, generally speaking, it's immediate. The artist who is about to come to the stage uses the craft of photography in a different way and to a very different end. He uses everyday objects as a means of expression, without image manipulation, but by rearranging their original purpose and sometimes their structure. He then juxtaposes them, and the result, courtesy of immaculate photographic technique, is invariably surprising. He's an artist steeped in the great tradition of Spanish surrealism, the subconscious mind, and the dream world, endowing the deceptively simple with qualities that leave everything open to interpretation. Here to translate, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome García de Marina.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am very excited to be here for the second time in this wonderful meeting. My name is García de Marina, and I'm a Spanish photographer. In my work, I use objects as a way of expression. Currently, I am being represented by 9 art galleries around the world, and I feel lucky because my photos have been shown in the 5 continents. In the next 25 minutes, I'll be showing some of my previous works. Then I'll be talking about some of my current projects and photos and some ideas about my workflow. I'd like to start with this photo. It was a tribute to one of the painters who has influenced my work the most, the Belgian painter René Magritte. This image reminds us of one of his best works where he drew a pipe and entitled it, "This is not a pipe," because it was actually a drawing. This photo serves as a motivational starting point for my presentation, The Other Side of Things. In my initial works, without realizing it, I was training my eye to see things differently. This is one of my first photos, and it was a challenge because it's the reflection in my niece's eye of one of the biggest buildings in my country. Within this building, a group of hands on the ground called my attention. I wanted to join the static hands with something dynamic, and I thought it might be interesting to capture someone running. This is my daughter, and I remember that she didn't want to appear in the photo. I took her favorite doll and put it away from her, so she had to run to pick it up. I used to go out with a group of photographers to look at the things they did, how they worked, and try to do something different, looking for new things. And I also liked taking photos difficult to understand and that were confusing for the viewer. This photo is a reflection of the beach in my city, and the image is turned upside down. When I started taking photos, I used to carry my camera everywhere and wanted to tell stories with the things that were happening around me. Here, I was looking at the gargoyles, and suddenly this bird appeared. It looks like the gargoyles are trying to catch it, right? Sometimes I used objects in my compositions. In this case, it was for a contest where I had to use wheels. And it occurred to me to put those wheels as a couple enjoying a sunset. When I was in a landscape, I took many wide images, but I liked to notice the small things, the things that could go unnoticed. In this case, for example, is a heart-shaped rock. If I was interested in a place, like a railway museum, I'd take a lot of photos of the trains and their little details, because I love telling stories with the things I came across with. For example, these plaques that looked like they were scared. Every photo I decided to take was a challenge for me, because I wanted to capture all the things that came to my mind, Sometimes it seemed impossible to do, but in this case, I wanted to take an original portrait of myself and managed to use a pen tip and a macro lens I had just bought. And I said to myself, why not? Now, let's have a look at the summary of my current work with this short video. I used to take part in photography forums and learn from other photographers. I remember once in one of those forums that someone proposed a contest with the theme Conceptual Photography. I didn't know its meaning, so I searched for it on the internet, and I realized that it was about telling stories with few objects. At that moment, I went to my kitchen, and my wife was cooking an omelette, and I saw this egg. It occurred to me to draw the footprints of a chicken, and this is my first conceptual photo. I am not a photographer of animals, but animals appear in my photos. This object was used to open and close a door, and that opening and closing movement reminded me of a butterfly. A spider, for example, by using knitting needles. I am not a photo portraitist either, but portraits are in my photos. In this image, the glasses form the word eye in Spanish. There is something interesting about this image. I remember the first time I saw it, if a person looked at it closely, they'd read the word eye. But if they saw it from afar, they'd see a face. There are people who see John Lennon and others, the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa. I am not a nature photographer either, but nature appears in my photos. I am neither a traveling nor an architecture photographer, but they are also in my work. I often wonder what kind of artist I am. The camera allows me to take images of those things that come to my mind. Objects have a great richness to tell stories, and my job consists of analyzing them and discovering their symbolic side. I've continued taking photographs on an individual basis. In my exhibitions, you can see different objects, such as pencils, glasses, spoons. With the passing of time, I've realized that it could be more interesting to prepare projects, like a group of photos that tell stories about the same topic. My first project, using thread spools, represented the 7 deadly sins. I used these spools because I felt they could represent a dressed or undressed human being, and the length of the thread could represent our life period. I brought two examples. In this case, this photo represents gluttony, and in this one, I want to represent envy. The colored threads that here represent those positions that we would like to have someday. My project, Diálogos, has been relevant in my career. And it was a work where my photos were combined with the works of one of the most important Spanish poets, Joan Brossa. Unfortunately, he passed away 20 years ago. The pieces came together in a form of dialogues. His work, here, in your left, where he used a top hat with a key, I imagined that turning that key sets the mind working. My photo, here on the right, conveys the same idea by using a question mark. When you think about something and you want to find a solution, and you put your mind to it. Brossa used the alphabet several times, and he said that it might represent the identity of a culture. In this case, I figured that he wanted to tell us how that identity may be changed or lost. My photo on the right, cutting a mirror with scissors, instead of telling about changes of our cultural identity, communicates that we may lose our own identity, because when we look in the mirror, we see ourselves. Now, I wanted to tell you about my project, The Unfinished Word, where I put together the visual language with written language. I am very interested in the surrealist movement, and this image is a tribute to the surrealism. In the 1930s, the surrealists used to meet in a cafe in Paris, and André Breton was at the head of the group. Breton wrote the first surrealist manifesto. This image represents those meetings. The coffee cup tells us about the meeting place, and the text that appears inside is a part of this manifesto, which evokes imagination. This image of the same project tells about identity, how authors have to open up to communicate their experiences and concerns. This is the third time that I have used an egg in my work, and here I wanted to represent the knowledge that our parents transmit us at birth. The text that appears in the next is a fragment of the Spanish book Don Quixote de la Mancha. I have included several allusions to Cervantes because this project has been shown in different offices of the Cervantes Institute. They spread the Spanish culture around the world. To finish talking about this project, I also included sign language and Braille. In this case, there are a few drops of water that represent the dots that a blind person uses to read. The word that can be read is water in Spanish. One of my latest projects that I have the honor to show in this edition of Exposure is entitled Innocent. And it's a project that tells about the violation of human rights in countries at war. I remember that in 2018, I was in Madrid about to catch a flight to Sweden to participate in a photographic meeting. At that time, I received the email from the director of Jungle Photo Festival in Myanmar, who invited me to participate in its next edition. The theme of the meeting was photojournalism, and the director invited me to make a project on photojournalism by using objects. At that time, I didn't know how to do it, but I remembered that I had taken this photo 2 years before, and it was my first photo that was a criticism of society. On the way from Madrid to Stockholm, I made sketches of some images, and eventually some of them were shown there. I realized how deep this project was, because it could tell many stories. So in the end, I made 48 images. This is one of the main photos of this project, and the rest of the images although some evoke positive feelings, others tell us about the suffering of society. With this image, I want to show how a tyrant comes to power by using force and bullets in a region at war. The project doesn't have explicit images where blood can be seen. Rather, it is a project for people to play with their imagination and see the pain and suffering in their mind. This image represents the disaster after a war. Here is an image that tells about people who have to leave their countries, taking their belongings, their families, their memories with them. Now, I'd like to share some ideas about how I put my work together. I try to be more conceptual in my photos. I try to tell stories with fewer elements, as not to put an interpretation on the viewer's mind. I can explain it here with a tennis ball with several springs, using fewer springs, just using a springs. The difference between the first and this one is the number of springs. But my intention was to talk about why a ball bounces. And in my mind, it's because there is something inside it that makes it possible. Adding more elements that I need could make the viewer's interpretation different. I have always tried to tell stories through a single photo, but there are some occasions that I need more. In this case, I wanted to tell about the fragility of a piece of paper when it falls, and it can be similar to the fragility of glass. I do like taking photographic sequences, but I've always had great difficulty in taking them. This happens because I normally use natural light in most of my images. If the light changes at some point in the process, I have to repeat the sequence again. Everything in my images is real. The process begins when I have the idea, I get the object, and finally I place them for the shoot. When looking at some of them, it seems that they were taken in a studio, but they weren't. I just need a background, an object, a camera, and natural light. After removing the scissors, this is how the photo looks. Right now, I've got many ideas, but I won't be able to carry them out until I get the right object. I don't like to give a title to the images because I don't want the viewers to make interpretation based on that. I want them to make their own interpretation and story. This sequence was the only time that gave a title because I realized that it could be difficult to understand. It is the representation of the 4 seasons. I'm interested in the temporality that some images have, how their meaning can change over time. This image, which was shown at Exposure 2018, had to be taken 2 years earlier. I wanted to capture people's attention on pollution. Today, unfortunately, it is telling us about the pandemic. Who knows what it will communicate in a few years. When I take a photo, I never know where it will end up. Maybe in an exhibition, in a book, in a magazine, or hanging on a wall. In this case, I am very honored that the postal department in my country published 162,000 stamps with this image last year. I have worked in different projects so far. I am currently working one about death, and recently I finished another about your country, about the United Arab Emirates, where through photos I tried to make the viewer take a trip to this land. The work is entitled Emirates, a journey to the Emirates culture, and consists of 22 photos. The project tells about the value of culture, art, religion, music, horses. I started it when I went back to Spain after taking part in Exposure 2018, because I realized I had fallen in love with this country. Actually, I didn't know I was going to come back here, and now I have the chance and the honor to share some photos with you. In this case, I emphasize the value of oil as a black gold. Through the representation of stars with diamonds, I want to show the value of the discoveries of astronomy in the Arab world. Water is an essential resource for creation and necessary for the needs of the body and spirit. This one shows the culture of water and its use in the Arab world. The camel represents nomadic life, and for generations, it has been a means of transportation through the desert. This image shows the value of camels, in this case, the saddlebags, reminding me an hourglass. I wanted to connect the sand of the hourglass with the sand of the desert. Rice is one of the basic foods in gastronomy. However, I didn't know that Emirates is one of the 20 largest exporters of rice of the world. I colored the grains of rice with the flag of your country. The date palm is known as the tree of life. My inspiration is that dates in the Arab world are jewels. This image is a tribute to Sharjah because it's the cultural emirate. I used a painter's palette to talk about art and culture. And finally, let me show this image where I've used coffee as a symbol of hospitality and generosity. In the coffee that comes out of the cup, you can see the shape of the 7 Emirates. Thank you very much for your invitation once more. I hope you have found interesting my vision of the things that surround us, things that don't speak but tell stories. Again, thank you, Exposure 2022, for allowing me to be here for the second time. Hopefully, I can come back in the future to share my new projects with you. Thank you.